Hi, this is Mr. Seymour, and this first lecture is going to talk about democracy. Then the second part of our lecture will talk about the political process and the stuff that your authors introduce in Chapter 1 of your textbook. So let's talk about democracy first. Let's get a feel of what the democratic process is, what a real democracy is. We all talk about how we live in a free country, but a lot of us don't really understand that a democracy is a little different than what we really live in. So let's look at what a democracy is and how we are a democracy and how we measure democracy. So what is a democracy? Well, democracy is defined through the Greek definition of demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. So it quite literally means power to the people. Webster defines democracy as a form of government in which people choose leaders by voting, an organization or situation where everyone is treated equally and has equal rights, a government by the people, especially rule of the majority, a government where the supreme power is vested in the people and it's exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation that usually involves free elections on a periodic basis. Now, we can measure how free our election systems are, how fair our process is, and then we can get an understanding of how democratic a society is. So democratic societies aren't necessarily the freest societies. They're the ones that allow the most citizen participation. So there are many forms of democracy. The first form is a direct democracy, Athenian democracy coming from Athens and Greece, in which everyone participates directly in every decision. Now, with 300 million plus people in the United States, can you imagine how totally messed up it would be to have all 300 million participate at one time in anything? The closest we get to is election day, and that's hard enough just to get people to participate. But to get people to participate in every decision and to come to a compromise would be very impractical, and that's why democracies, direct democracies, don't really work in countries like the United States. The problem is it's impractical, because as the population grows, it becomes harder to get everybody to get together and participate. Now, indirect or representative democracies are a lot more practical, and that's the form of government that we have. They're based on representation, and the people vote on other people to represent them. Now, who runs, who gets elected, how much does each vote count? All of those things then become part of the equation as to how democratic a country really is. Most nations today can be measured by degrees or levels of democracy. So this is not a black and white issue. You're either a democracy or you're not a democracy. The question is, on what scale are you democratic? And we need to look at how we can measure that scale. One way is to look at, one theory of democracy is to look at the elitist theory of democracy. In the elitist theory of democracy, the only role that the citizen has is to choose the leaders. Once the leaders are chosen, the people are out of the loop. So once election day passes, the citizens can tune out while the elected representatives take care of business. I hope you can see that there are some problems in this theory of democracy. Now, support for this theory of democracy is that voters are choosing the cream of the crop to represent their country, and that citizens should trust their leaders to do what's best. But is that always the case? The criticism is that it is dangerous to let the government run roughshod over the public. In a pluralist theory of democracy, the central tenet is that group membership gives people voice, and this is the key to political power because it encourages elected officials to make decisions on behalf of the groups. The problem is if you have too many groups, no one gets anything accomplished. A simultaneous advantage, though, in pluralist theory, and at the same time a disadvantage, is that it requires more activity from the citizens, and it requires citizens to step up and form and join those groups. That's not easy to do. Now, participatory democracy is a form of government where citizens play an active role in controlling all of the major aspects of their lives. So we measured the democracy in a participatory democracy on how much control citizens exercise and how much they engage themselves in their government. It generally requires citizens to vote on each major issue that may affect them, or at the very least to get to know the issues and to get involved. It requires an enormous amount of effort, of time, knowledge. Most observers of American politics believe that we fit under a pluralist umbrella, but are we truly totally pluralist? That becomes the question. That's why we have political parties. Those political parties fill the role of those groups that get engaged and help us voice our desires. But when the voices become too loud, we have the problem of hyperpluralism. This is often described as pluralism gone sour. Groups become so strong that government gives in to the different groups and is weakened, and nothing gets accomplished, and we get what is called policy gridlock. This occurs because there are too many alternate voices and little or no incentive to reach a consensus through either debate or compromise. So this is a model as painted by Norman Rockwell that shows us a direct citizen participation, and this would be a town hall meeting. So when you stand up at a town hall meeting or a forum and you address your representatives and ask them questions and hold them accountable, what you're doing is direct citizen participation. There are underlying assumptions, though, about democracy. Democratic governments tend to have the following common threads, and then we can compare them across the scope to see how democratic a government is. The first thread is that the citizens have control of the agenda, power to the people. A second is that citizens will step up and get an enlightened understanding of the issues, problems, policies, and policymakers and those running for office. And that's asking an awful lot. Effective participation means that citizens step up and actually engage and actually take responsibility for doing things like voting and holding their representatives accountable. And then the last thing is voting equality. How much does every vote count? Do the votes of some count more than others? If they do, then you're not a democratic nation. Now, controlling the agenda means that the public needs to have the opportunity to decide which political issues and initiatives should be brought up and deliberated or discussed by their government, and what should be turned into policy. That's called a policy agenda. Enlightened understanding means that before the decision-making process can begin, the citizens must have ample and equal opportunity to discover and to affirm or approve those new policies and their consequences, and to understand them with full disclosure of all of the details. Effective participation means that during the decision-making process, citizens need to have adequate and equal opportunity to form preferences on each topic and to make others aware of those preferences. As the decision-making process reaches that final stage, we need to look at how much does every vote count. Does everyone have equal access to and an equal vote in the election process? One organization that has gone and has put a website up called Freedom House at freedomhouse.org you can look at how democratic different nations are and why they're rated the way that they are. And they rate these nations on three factors. One is the degree of freedom that the people have. This would be civil liberties. Another is their political rights and protections, how constitutions protect and how they're enforced. And then the third is civil liberties. So, here's what you need to know. The underlying assumption of democracy is that the people will be involved in their own governance. Where in the Constitution are both democracy and civil liberties directly addressed? In the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that we'll talk about in Chapter 2. What are the foundations of democracy? One of those foundations is strong institutions and the rule of law. Things work well and laws are enforced. A functioning state is capable of delivering public services. We expect things from our government. We also expect that our government has strong judicial institutions which can interpret the law appropriately and fairly. We also expect that routine political processes and standards of behavior among our politicians and policymakers lead to peaceful resolution of conflict and change of leadership. We don't expect fights. Well, sometimes that's what we get, though. So we need to begin to look, how democratic are we and where can we improve democracy in the United States? Competitive and free elections and fair elections. Universal suffrage, the ability, your right to vote, and the ability to run for office. Everybody should have the right to vote within a certain age group at least, as we do in the United States. But it's taken us 200 years to get to that right. No government coercion or predetermined outcomes. A competitive political party system. That means that we have a two-party system and that no one group or faction controls the agenda. We need to have true choice being offered to our voters. Citizenship and civil society means that either acting alone or collectively in groups, we can influence policy, and we desire to do that, and we don't just let politicians do what they want. Government should allow for the free creation of associations and allow the role of associations or groups in the political process. Government and elected officials should be held accountable for their actions and their policy decisions. And governments should protect political rights and freedoms. That means a free and open exchange of information, the allowing of public debate, a free press, and media. All of these are First Amendment rights. Constitutionally protected political rights and civil liberties. Again, the Bill of Rights. Tolerance among citizens. We need to learn to get along and put up with each other and tolerate opposing opinions. So what are some of the contemporary issues that we're facing today? One is, are we a true democracy? Second, does a democracy have to model the American system of government? Should we have the right as a nation in the United States to export and force other countries to follow our model? Is American export of democracy a positive or a negative impact on our geopolitical system today? Is it good for world politics for the United States to step in and say, you're going to follow our model? So, for example, U.S. involvement in Iraq and the Arab Spring from a few years ago that has turned into almost a nuclear winter amongst different countries. Just look at Iraq. We've left Iraq, and now Iraq is being facing insurgencies that are threatening groups of people. So we're going to look next at politics and government, and I'm going to save that till the next lecture. So we'll stop here for this lecture.